Yes, you can.
Very well. Welcome to the 72nd seminar series for the Center of Islam and Global Affairs here at Istanbul Zaim University. We are very honored and privileged to have with us today a very special guest. Her name is Josephine Guilbeau. Josephine has been an U.S. Army intelligence officer and analyst for many years. She has several tools. She's an expert in Iraq, Afghanistan, as well as in North Korea and China, I believe. She also worked with the policy planning within the Defense Department. And she's also, since the Gaza genocide, has been very vocal in her opposition to what's going on in terms of not only of the Israeli atrocities taking place in Gaza for the past almost year and a half now, but also regarding U.S. policy. She's been speaking not only to the public, but also to the members of Congress and others. And today we're very, very pleased to have this conversation with her. Welcome.
Thank you. Right here in Istanbul.
Right here in Istanbul. Thank you so much for making this trip and for being with us. And of course, the question that is on everybody's mind when we speak about a U.S. officer, intelligence officer being vocal, what kinds of challenges, what kind of soul searching you had to go through until you decided to come forward and speak with passion and speak with honesty and truly challenge the political establishment in the US, particularly at this time.
Yeah, so thank you for having me again. It's an honor to be here and be addressing all of you. I think for me, this wasn't just it didn't just happen overnight where I came to the conclusion and reality of what my country has been complicit in, participating in, not only in its unwavering support towards Israel, but the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war. Back in 2017, I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I was an intelligence analyst for a contract called Habeas Corpus Writ. And this is where in Guantanamo Bay, the detainees have the opportunity to file a legal proceeding called habeas corpus, where it allows you to question why you're being detained without charges. And so I, from this position and assignment, had access to documentation that really disturbed me by what my country had participated in at the black sites right after 9/11. And so after this point, I decided I wanted to start following media outlets from other countries, Al Jazeera, Middle East Monitor, WEON, Hinduism Times. I just wanted to know for myself what other countries and people's perspective was when my country did something, overseas. And so this is 2017, and nothing really happened that was significant from this point except for the pullout of Afghanistan. And even at this point, I felt like overall, there was a lot of atrocities, but I was pleased that at the very least they were willing to evacuate the people here. And so October 7th comes. And on my social media, I'm following all of these media outlets. No, at this time, no, I am working for the Department of Homeland Security as a cybersecurity engineer for critical infrastructure. And so this happens, and I'm following these media outlets, and I'm watching the footage the actual footage coming out of Gaza. And it's just a completely different perspective than what my government and the Western media was showing. And I just couldn't believe how absolutely opposite the narrative was. And I can see clearly that it was not self-defense. They were massacring civilians, women, children, men, elderly. The bombing was indiscriminate. I knew from my own background that there's technology that exists that you can do precision targeting, and not just an entire residential building. And so, and of course, I know Israel has probably the best weapons technology that exists on our planet. So I knew by October 24th that this was not a war, and that this was a genocide. And so, I didn't know what to do, really. I wasn't sure how I was going to speak out. I wasn't sure how I could even be impactful. And also, I was worried about my career still at this time. I knew I was going to lose my security clearance. I had a top secret SCI clearance with a polygraph. So my clearance was so high, such a high clearance, I have to take polygraphs to keep it. And so I knew that the moment that I spoke out against what I was witnessing, that my career in the government would be over. And so it took me a little bit of time to mentally accept this. But after a few months of watching massacre after massacre of children, I knew as a mother, as a Christian, that above all else was to speak out for these children, and that I was willing to sacrifice everything, even if it meant going to prison, or even if it meant being assassinated.
So you were an active officer at the time while you're considering all these things.
I got out of the U.S. Army in February of 2023. So at the time, I was a consultant with a defense contracting company working for DHS.
Honorably discharged.
Yes, honorably discharged.
With medals.
Yes.
So you had
17 years.
right. So
yes.
you had all this background, and you were considering basically the moral aspect of what stand you're going to take, not only as a former U.S. soldier, but also as a U.S. citizen and human being, that you couldn't fathom what's going on while you're watching this.
Absolutely. And I understand, the concept of time is something that I think American citizens don't think of. And for me, I consider the concept of time, and I have 4 children. What kind of future does this mean for my children in this country if we are, basically the biggest terrorists in the world? My country has been for decades in the Middle East, causing destabilization, economic crisis, the death of millions of people in all of these countries. And this isn't just going to go unpunished. There at some point is going to be some sort of consequences and repercussions, and it's going to roll down to the American people. And I wonder what my children's future looks like. What does it look like for their children? Is there going to be a draft in the military? I have a 15-year-old daughter, and we have a recruitment crisis in America right now. People don't want to join the Army. They don't want to join the military. They see what's happening. And so the idea of even a draft is a real possibility. And I have a 15-year-old, and I don't want that for her. I don't want that for any American citizen. As a matter of fact, I think that there's a diplomatic way to go about what has been occurring. And, unfortunately, my government hasn't been able to step up to the plate and do that. And, we're watching our country become very isolated.
So you had these moral questions, and you were very adamant that this is genocide. But did it take you some time to decide that I want to speak out?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I really didn't have a social media platform as an intelligence officer. I didn't even have TikTok. I got TikTok for the first time recently, just to be able to do an interview for this cause. but I really didn't know how I was going to go about doing it. So, you know, at first I was contacting former colleagues, current military active duty colleagues, you know, this behind the scenes movement to try and tell them this is really what's going on. But it wasn't until sometime in November, I had dinner with my family and Thanksgiving. I couldn't stop talking about the genocide. At this point, I wake up crying every day. I go to sleep crying. I just can't even believe what my eyes are seeing on the other side of a screen, and just how helpless I feel. And so my sister made a comment that I should tell the world. And so I said, well, I guess that's what I'm going to do. And I think I had like 150 people at the time following me on Instagram, and that's where I started.
Wow. Well, I'm happy also that we have today with us Awais Khan, who is a research fellow here at CIGA, and he will also be part of this conversation. Awais.
It's so nice to have you here at CIGA. I think the moral dilemma that you face has been faced by a lot of people that are working in government. I know that in the State Department, there were many people who tried to raise alarm around what is happening. There was a dissent channel in that department. Did your department have such mechanisms, or where you were working in the government? Did they have any kind of dissent channel for you to express your opinions?
It's interesting you asked that, because the company that I was working for at the time, that was the defense contracting agent company for the Department of Homeland Security, was Accenture. And when I went on my unpaid, first I took an unpaid leave of absence in the middle of my assignment at DHS. And I told them it was to advocate against the genocide. I made it very clear of why I was going on my unpaid leave of absence. And I didn't really get any response. They approved my leave. And so I started advocating more for Gaza and traveling, lobbying at Congress. For months, I went with lobby groups to speak with senators, congressmen. But there wasn't really an avenue there either. No, I would say I started showing up to my meetings at Department of Homeland Security with my kafia. And then on Mondays, we would talk about, oh, what'd you do this weekend? And I would say things like, I put Free Palestine stickers all over Washington, D.C., or I went to a protest. I wanted to make it very clear that this is what I was doing and this is what was happening. But honestly, I don't think that there was really any regard. No. It was.
How did they respond to this kind of?
My team lead actually had asked me to tone it down a bit. But I honestly have always been a resistance type personality, so I didn't care. But it wasn't until December, when I was going to return to work and work for a few months, and then actually resign from my position, that I received an email from my HR telling me that a complaint had been filed against me. And well, this is a good question, right? So I had a good feeling of why, because on LinkedIn I had been posting videos and comments and sharing, you know, the truth on LinkedIn. And I saw in the middle of the summer that this HR representative had viewed my profile. And so I had a feeling, okay, this is coming when I return back to work. Well, I returned to work, and this very same person messages me, emails me, saying that an ethics complaint was filed against me. And I emailed, I want to know about what, and she refused to tell me. And so I said, I'm not going to any meeting until you tell me what it's about. You can't force me to go to a meeting without telling me what the context is. And she got very upset. And then I at this point decided I really didn't even want to return to this company. So I submitted a request to the HR department asking for them to be transparent if any IDF soldiers were employed by the company. And I made it very clear that I did not feel comfortable working at a company that employs current IDF soldiers who are involved in the genocide. and that if they could not be transparent with me in employing these war criminals, then I wanted to resign. And within about 1 week, I got an email saying your resignation is immediate. They could not be transparent. This is Accenture Federal Services or Accenture LLC did not want to be transparent with the fact that they have an office inside of Israel, a cybersecurity lab that they operate, which is, what I did, cybersecurity. So I knew at some point I was going to potentially come across some of these current or former IDF soldiers who are war criminals. And instead of being transparent and taking a look at that policy within their own corporation, they force resign me, basically.
Can I? One of the things that I think an interesting perspective, or maybe a unique perspective that you bring to this whole public debate is the fact that you have, privileged information about, behind the scenes, what happens in policy circles when they make these decisions. And I think that it's that kind of knowledge that led for you to have the kind of conviction
Yes.
that made you put everything on the line. Maybe you could share some of those details that made you make the decision that, this is a genocide. These are purposeful actions that are being carried out by select individuals. I think you mentioned in your opening remarks that, Israel had certain technologies that they refused to use in this case. Maybe you could give us more details about that, because that will allow us to understand, the subsequent decisions and what led down this path that you're on.
Yeah, so I think if I'm being honest with you, I think that there is something that exists within the intelligence community that in and of itself is bias. And I think it's done on purpose. It's something we call compartmentalization. So you only have access to a certain piece of the entire mission, basically. And so even as an intelligence officer, when I look back at some of the assignments that I was a part of and think about the targeting and think about the profiling of people, especially in the Middle East, it makes me wonder, how do we read this documentation or these reports and have full trust? It's because from the moment we join the military, or even really in America, I'm 36 years old. So 9/11, I was in grade school. And so we are programmed. We are programmed to be biased. We are institutionalized to believe that whatever we are reading is in fact true, because it's coming from our government. It's coming from these trusted, agencies, CIA, FBI. And so there's a level of bias, because I think back to some of the assignments that I've been a part of, and I truly believe in my heart that some of the things we were doing were to innocent people. And so, but in my mind, it's the report says that they're associated with this person, and this person is a financer of ISIS, and this person is, the logistical planner of ISIS. But now I start wondering about these reports and just the level of bias that they have, because even now what we're witnessing inside of Gaza, basically everyone is Hamas. And so I look back to these moments where we were, counterintelligence.
People in America who advocate for it are also.
Yes, I'm Hamas.
Yeah.
I've been accused of being a Russian infiltrator, a useful idiot of Iran. I'm funded by the Chinese government. I'm Hamas. I mean, they will use any narrative. But I think this point is so important for the world to understand that there is bias even inside of our intelligence organizations. When we read something that says they are an associate of, they are connected to, it could just potentially be that that's their cousin, that's their friend, or that they really aren't even funding any of these terrorist organizations. In fact, they might not even be terrorist organizations. We just use this word terrorist to be able to perpetrate these atrocities and justify these atrocities because of these oligarchies that have assets in these areas, or want the assets, or want the resources, or want the land. But, you know, this being institutionalized starts at a very young age in America. You know, when I was 18 years old and I joined the military, I came from a very poor family. And so I didn't have a lot of options of what I was going to do. And this is by design in America. We call it the economic draft. You're basically drafted into the military because you're too poor to basically do anything else. And so I joined the military at 18, and everything that I knew about the Middle East was what they were telling me at this point. I had no idea about the Middle East. 9/11 had recently happened. And so everything I'm being told is that anyone in the Middle East that goes against the narrative of America is a terrorist. And so they do this to you to convince you, because basically they want you to be able to kill them. They want you to be able to deploy to Afghanistan, deploy to Iraq, and deploy to Syria, and be able to kill these people without consciousness. And so this programming starts with us as at a very, very young age in America. And then especially once you join the military, it's just dialed up times 100. But I want to go back to this question you asked about the awakening part of all of this, because up until this point, even after the genocide, even after the genocide started, I was still thinking that maybe they just don't know. Maybe they just don't know the truth. I was thinking this. I was convinced that maybe I just need to go to Washington, D.C. I need to lobby with these senators, with these congressmen, and I need to tell them the truth, because surely if they know the truth, they're going to act. They're going to stop this. So my very first lobbying was with Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. And I had my military uniform on. And I'm from Louisiana, live in Ohio. But I went to speak with all of them, regardless of if I'm their constituent. And I'm in my dress blues uniform. And he walks out of his office waving an Israeli flag in my face. And I'm in shock. This is my first time in my life that I am realizing that our leaders inside of America know the truth, and they are refusing to act on it. And so, of course, I was just devastated. I think it took me about 2 weeks to get over the reality that my leaders in America, the congressmen, the senators, are complicit in this genocide. It was absolutely disheartening. I didn't even know what I was going to do. Honestly, I felt a bit helpless, because now you're looking at the executive branch, the legislative branch are complicit in the genocide in another country. And so for me, this was a big awakening. This is where I started questioning everything. I started questioning my, assignments, my mobilization, Operation Enduring Freedom, even the name, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. What's such propaganda that we use as Americans?
You felt that your life has been a lie.
It's a whole lie.
My
It's been
God.
an entire lie.
That's a very profound feeling, that you feel that what you thought you were fighting for is just a charade.
It is a complete lie. And one of the not the most disheartening things, obviously the children that face the consequences of my country's actions is the biggest consequence. But also, we send our brothers and sisters from America to die based on these lies for the rich.
Wow. I'm sorry that you had to go through this, but it's good that the American people, at least, you've been the perfect American, from everybody's point of view. You grew up, you felt that there is a compelling case that you needed to be, yes, you were poor, but you also wanted to serve the country, because not every poor person goes and serve the country. You spent 17 years in this, and then you wake up to not just a a genocide perpetrated by an ally, but that the country itself is complicit and part and parcel of what's going on. And then you figured out, okay, let's go to Congress and try to tell people, something's going on here that you should prevent it. And then you find that they know what it is, and they are just don't care.
They are a part of it.
Yeah,
They are actively a part of it. Finding out about APAC, a foreign lobby group who doesn't have to register as a foreign lobby group and is completely infiltrated inside of my government. So you're talking about, a total of what, 400, 500 people that are between the executive and legislative branch that are completely infiltrated by the Israeli government.
And once you recognize this, what did you tell your friends, your family, the people that you're close with, and were they surprised? Did they know? How did they react?
I mean, honestly, I think it's such a big awakening that it is very difficult to accept. Especially my former military colleagues, because accepting the truth means that what we did overseas and what they did overseas are war crimes. And they will have to live with knowing that they killed innocent people. And of course, many military people wake up to this, and we have 22 veterans commit suicide a day. My father committed suicide and was a veteran also. And so, veterans do eventually come to the conclusion, and this is a big reason why they are committing suicide. And it's also a big reason why many veterans and military refuse to see the truth, because accepting that you were a part of this war machine, this killing machine, is not easy. The past 17 months of my life has not been easy in this healing process, this accepting that, this wasn't my fault. I was a child when I joined the military. I was lied to. I was brainwashed. But at the end of the day, now that I know the truth, this is what I can do. What can I do now? I know the truth. I can't make up or take back anything that I've done in the past, but I can do something now. And so, any veterans that would hear this, I tell them, please speak out. Your voice is so powerful. Our voices as former military and government are so powerful inside of America. Everyone loves a veteran. They praise veterans in America, veteran parades, veteran dinners. I mean, everyone loves the military, and our voices are just so powerful. So, I reach out to my colleagues and I say, come to the acceptance of what you were a part of, understand that it wasn't your fault and that we were lied to, and use your voice.
And what's the reaction?
I get a mix of reactions. I have some friends who are currently active duty that work at the Pentagon that can't believe what's happening. They don't understand, even with Ukraine. They don't understand why the government is pushing these foreign policies where we're spending billions of dollars to slaughter hundreds of thousands of people. And then I get some that push back. I get some that argue with me. I get some that tell me that I'm a part of a terrorist organization. I get some that tell me it's a conspiracy theory. But I have had some that since this administration has started, have called me and said you were right. And I'm sorry. People that are active duty and government officials that are realizing with this new administration, everyone sort of was optimistic that this new administration would at least end the genocide, and the war in Ukraine. But since that isn't happening, now people are realizing that this is deeper than just our executive branch.
I'm sure while you're going through this process, you have to go through also an education. I don't know if you come across the book by Mearsheimer and Walt, the Israeli Lobby, in which they have extensive evidence how the Iraq War was also a product of that lobby. And that's where you served probably most of your life, thinking that this is an honorable service while it was actually pushing for the national security interest of another country.
Well, there is a book. I don't know if you know, I'm a fellow for Eisenhower Media Network. And the director of Eisenhower Media Network, his name is Dennis Fritz. And he, along with Larry Wilkerson, a former colonel and advisor, yes, to Colin Powell, wrote a book called The Deadly Betrayal. And this is where I really found out the truth about how much Israel was involved in us going to Iraq. I didn't really understand that. In the back of my head, I'm like, oh, it was for oil resources. But it was meant to destabilize Saddam Hussein's government and that country because they were economically productive. They were growing, they were stable, and any stability in the Middle East is a threat to Israel. Just like Libya with Gaddafi, same thing. His economy was doing well, the people were doing well. From my understanding, the people loved him, and then all of a sudden he's gone. This is Hillary Clinton. And why? Because any stability in the Middle East is a threat to Israel. And so they go to these wars to destabilize these countries, to drop them down to this poverty level where, they can't have any influence. If you
Before turning it over to Waze, I wanted to ask about your public campaign. You've been going through many rallies and many speeches and so on and so forth. Do you see any change in the Americans' attitude towards that war, that genocide, or do you see still the brainwashing is working?
I think that there are a few factors of why the brainwashing doesn't work anymore in comparison, if you will, to post 9/11 days. One of the biggest backfires that my government did was bringing thousands and thousands of people from Afghanistan to America, because now most Americans have a friend who's Muslim. So when they try and speak this narrative in Western media about Muslims, most Americans are like, wait a second, I know someone who is a Muslim, and that's not accurate at all about them. They're not this way. They don't, the Western media and our government tries saying that Muslims want to, kill Christians, destroy America. They're coming after America. We must kill them in their country. Otherwise, they're coming to our country. And the reality is that doesn't work anymore, because too many people have friends who are Muslim or have access to TikTok and Instagram. So there definitely has been a sway in the public opinion in America, 100%. With the Republican side, and especially the extreme right side, it's a little bit more difficult because I don't know if you know this, but most Republicans live paycheck to paycheck in my country. And with the economic crisis we're experiencing now and inflation, they are looking for a savior. And Trump was supposed to be the savior for them, the false prophet, exactly. And now they are coming to realize that he's not saving us. He's not pulling out of these wars, because one of the campaigns that Trump had was that no more wars, peace. We don't want to be involved in any more wars. And so this is even causing a divide inside of his own party. So yes, I think the American people understand the truth. The reality is, though, what can we do? What can we do as American citizens to stop this? Because our politicians don't listen to us. They don't listen to their constituents. They're paid for by a foreign lobby. They are controlled by Israel. And I think that Israel truly is threatening their lives. I believe that they have blackmail on these politicians. So they are either threatening our politicians with blackmail or threatening them with their lives. Absolutely. I mean, in order for me to have a top secret clearance at the level that I had, I have to go through extensive 8 months worth of investigation, specifically to not have anything any foreign government can use against me. So, but these politicians, they don't go through the same types of investigations. They don't have the same security clearance levels. And so there's a lot about these politicians that can be used against them. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit more about, taking a bigger picture. I'm sure the past, 17 months you have been thinking about the bigger picture. Like, why would the government of the United States be so invested in this one small country uh, amongst all of these other possible partners and people that they could have befriended? What do you think is the bigger strategy here? Like, what is your analysis of how you see Israel's role? I mean, you said something about the fact that there's these oligarchs and it's because of them that these wars are happening. So maybe you can elaborate more about, I mean, there's wars for oligarchs, but then there's genocide. And how do we square those two things?
Yeah, so I've come to the conclusion that Israel is a forward operating base filled with civilians. So, in America has over 800 military bases in 80 countries. But this one I consider to be its military base in the Middle East, but in a different, it's built differently because they have flooded it with civilians and made it into a sovereign state. But the reality is the Middle East has a lot of oil, and our economy is circulating around this. And I believe that our country is America is so it's so hell-bent on controlling that oil that if it can do it from its forward operating base, that's what it will do. So that's really what I believe. This is an operating base, a military base filled with civilians that is controlled by both the Israeli and American oligarchy.
Interesting. And do you feel like most of the military interventions that have taken place, since not just the Iraq War, but also, the Arab Spring, were motivated by this logic of trying to control basically the resources of the Middle East?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that America's goal is to control the resources of the Middle East. Absolutely. I hope to see in the future the Arab League, Istanbul, Saudi Arabia rise up and take full charge of this region
What do you think?
together, alliance together.
Then one of the frustrating things for those of us who live in this region was to see the inactivity of all of these governments. I mean, just like you had an epiphany, a lot of us living in this part of the world also had a range of epiphanies. One of them was that, what we expected our governments to do, they didn't do willfully. Um, and There's a whole host of reasons that have been given for why this inaction happened. Um, uh, so yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, what is your analysis of why these countries are not able to rise up to the moral cause of their time? Why weren't they able to intervene in a genocide? What does the United States and Israel have uh, that has tied the hands of some of these major powers? Like Turkey, for example, has the largest army in NATO. Egypt has a sizable army. You know, Saudi Arabia has control of, a lot of resources and wealth. I mean, what is the reason in your analysis of why they weren't able to resist
Or intervene?
or intervene?
Yeah, that's a good question that I ask daily. I'm a part of a international peace coalition that is platformed on Schiller Institute, and I've listened to a lot of foreign ambassadors speak to the reasons why they can't isolate Israel or isolate America. And it's because many of these countries, like yours, are so economically intertwined that doing something this significant, let's say sanctioning Israel in total, would in a way cripple the economy here. And so what I'm understanding from BRICS and watching these BRICS countries sort of move their alliances and trade agreements amongst the global South so that they can make these decisions to sanction and isolate countries that commit genocide, like Israel, without having this internal collapse to their own people. And, I understand that, especially countries in South America that are want to join BRICS. They're so intertwined with the United States of America that imagine if they spoke out so strongly, condemned so strongly, or even said, we are cutting all trade agreements. What would happen to their people? Their people would suffer immensely. And so, but I do think it's happening. As I'm sure you guys understand what's happening with BRICS. I do think it's happening. We're becoming more isolated. The global South is turning within themselves to do trade agreement, economic agreement, and security alliances within themselves to not have to rely so heavily on the United States. So I think the needle is moving in the right direction, but these things take so much time. So
I think you're right. I think the United States takes much from these countries in terms of sovereignty and independence. They use two tactics, basically, or two strategies, one for rich countries and one for poor countries. The rich countries, what they do is that they force them to put the excess money in the American economy. Like the Gulf states, for example, they have about $1.7 trillion in the US economy. And if they try to misbehave, meaning that they take a policy that would be contrary to the US policy, then they will just take it. I mean, they will just, confiscate that kind of money. And for poor countries, they give them enough loans in which they're not able to pay back. And therefore, they say, if you try again to take a different line, then we're going to ask you to pay this back. And that's going to basically collapse your economy. So both ways, they try to control it. So the issue here, the key issue is independence and sovereignty that people need to claim. I want to take you back to the United States. Again, looking at your experience for the past more than a year now in this kind of an environment, you find hostile political establishment, maybe even the media, but also you find that there are more activism in the U.S. towards Palestine than it's ever been. I lived in the United States for 40 years. I've never seen that much street demonstrations and student movement and others. And now they are trying to push back, particularly the Zionists, with their control over this current administration and trying to crack down heavily, as we've seen in the past few weeks. So where do you see the future lying? Do you see that there will be more protests or there will be more muted reaction to these crackdowns?
Yeah, I of course there will be more crackdowns. But with every crackdown comes more protests. And so, it's this the pendulum swinging. You try and stop the people, just like with Mahmoud Khalil. Everyone went out protesting. I saw calls for protests in towns I had never seen calls for. So even in our smaller towns, protests are coming out. But definitely we're gonna see more crackdowns. The Department of Justice just published a document stating that they are going to investigate and prosecute those involved in October 7th inside of the United States, and that they're also going to be investigating anyone that supports Hamas. They have financial accountants and they're I'll send you the document later, because it was disturbing, honestly, because they consider everyone that's a protester or organization that supports Gaza right now as pro-Hamas.
Mm.
So I often wonder, what does this mean for all of the nonprofits, NGOs that are supporting this? They're going to be combing through their financials and just looking for something to be able to shut them down. So I anticipate a crackdown for sure, but also at the same time, the people will rise. They always do. So I do know that that's going to happen. The other avenue that many are taking is, in just 2 years, we have another election cycle.
Right.
And there are many people who are willing to campaign and support candidates who want to run, who have the fundamentals of humanity for free. And so these types of things are happening as well. And so, we have this thought that even in 2 years, if we could just get 20 or 30 new candidates to win these positions, and then in the next 2 years, we get another 20 or 30. And then the next 2 years, we get another 20 or 30. Now we're at 80. And so in 6 years, if we have 80 new candidates inside of our congressional staff who have humanity in as their fundamental values, who won't take money from foreign lobby groups, then we can really start seeing a long-term change from our country.
It's a very interesting thought, because unfortunately both major parties are controlled by the Zionist machine. So to get, let's say, 20 new Congress people who are neither Republicans nor Democrats, it would be unprecedented.
Well,
That's
that's the thing. We can use those party titles. And like I've been thinking about running myself in my district, and I would run as a Republican.
Oh, I see.
I
Oh,
would run
oh,
as a Republican, but my goal would be to go in
right.
and reform
Mm.
what the Republican Party is.
That could be a winning strategy.
Yes, it will be.
Very good, very good. I think that's great. What that means, you need more organization, mobilization, and really awareness, and to have an organization behind it.
Yes.
And at the same time, trying to stay away from government crackdowns. That's a tall
Yes.
order, but that would be very, welcoming change that happens. I would like to give one more round for Awais, and then we can go around the table.
I just wanted to ask you about just going back to the genocide. As a former military officer, or you probably know of the procedures that are required when engaging civilian population. Can you tell us a little bit about from your perspective? What are those normal procedures that militaries are supposed to do in this kind of context that we didn't see happen in
Yes.
Gaza purposefully?
Yeah. So, when we join the military, we are taught about the Geneva Conventions. This is one of the first things that we actually learn, because everyone is assigned a code, or I guess like a level of protection based on the Geneva Conventions. And so for me, when I first joined the military, I was a combat medic. And so I had level 3 protection, because as a medic in the military, we are supposed to respond and triage to both the enemy and our own military. And so therefore we are considered to be protected. And so this is where we first learn about the Geneva Conventions and, international law and war crimes. So from the onset of joining the military, we understand, what is supposed to happen and what's not supposed to happen.
This is standard.
This is standard.
Oh,
I do have an undergrad. I was going to be a lawyer. Maybe that'll come one day too. Who knows? But more recently, I've actually learned more about the artillery side of things, because in my background, I was in an infantry battalion. I was the first female when they changed the law to allow females inside of combat MOSs and infantry units. I didn't really know a lot about the artillery side, but I have a friend who I've met through this movement who explained to me how the process of what it looks like to be able to drop artillery inside of residential areas. All I ever knew was urban operations, because during the Iraqi war, when we first invaded, everything that we were training for inside of America was urban operations to avoid what we're seeing now. Basically, It's to learn how to go in and out of buildings, building to building, without having to bomb the entire building. How to do floor by floor. Right. This is what we learned for months. This is what we were taught. And obviously that's not anything that we've seen inside of Gaza. They just literally dropped 2,000-pound bombs. But I did learn that there is a process, and even NATO has a process in and of itself, that in order to request artillery to be dropped, all of the civilian casualties are all taken into consideration.
Yeah.
None of this is happening here. None of this is happening. All of these processes that are in place are being completely bypassed.
And what was surprising to a lot of the observers was how the everyday soldiers in the Israeli army were responding to this, which, okay, I can understand that from this, like, from the high ups, there's this, but what we saw on the ground was, everyday soldiers, like, almost basking in what seems to be complete inhumane destruction of women and children. Weren't they? I mean, as a former military member, weren't they also given the same kind of training that you were?
I'm
Or do you think
honestly not sure.
there's a difference?
If I'm honest with you, I think that what we're witnessing right now is beyond brainwashing. I'm going to speak to my Christian values, and moral values on this. I think that this society inside of Israel has been programmed to dehumanize Palestinian children. And I really start to wonder if this comes from this generational trauma of their own experiences during the Holocaust. It's almost like the abused became the abuser. What we are witnessing is a depth of evil that in modern day time is being live streamed across our cell phones. This goes beyond a military brainwashing. What we are witnessing is instilled inside of these human beings from birth, inside of Israel from birth. And they do this by design in order to carry out the slaughtering and massacring of babies. This is evil beyond any comprehension. I'm actually happy that I can't comprehend it. That means I'm human. That means I have a soul, that I have love inside of my heart, that my heart is not dark. When I look at the IDF soldiers, when I look at this society, I wonder, how can a society have become so inhumane and dark? And how do we collectively, as humans across this planet, allow this society to have a sovereign state when they have been committing genocide for 76 years? At what point are we going to decide, as humanity in general, as a species in general, when are we going to decide collectively that you cannot exist as a society in sovereignty when you carry out such atrocities against children? This is the true question that we have to ask ourselves.
Unfortunately, the Zionist movement, ideology, and now the Zionist regime was based on the fact that it's an exclusivist state and that they need to be blind to the suffrage of the Palestinian, to the future of the Palestinians, to the status of the Palestinians. And that's what we've been witnessing for now 8 decades. And now they even want to not only genocide the Palestinians, they want to have a wholesale displacement, even led by the most powerful person on earth. It's a very tragic situation. That's why people need, they have the courage like yourself to speak out against these atrocities. I'm going to offer it now to our audience here to have, if you have any questions or comments, and then we'll come back.
I am Ahmed Abu Risha, an undergraduate of political science in this university. I just have 4 or 5 questions. I don't know if we have time for that. Is that?
Give us 3.
All right. So The part that was most confusing to me is um, basically I don't understand the role or the identity of Israel exactly as a state. You stated that basically you said that when America did the invasion in Afghanistan, this was to destabilize the region in favor of Israel, right? So this is in order to perpetuate Israeli interest. But then you stated that Israel, you believe that Israel is an asset, military asset of the US with a bunch of civilians there to justify its existence, right? And then Dr. Sani said that both parties in the US are controlled by the Zionists. So it's like an Ouroboros in a sense. Like, where did it start? Who's really in control here, right?
The oligarchy.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes.
All right, all right, all right. This is from the beginning of the conversation. You talked about how when you met with one of the politicians or officials in the government, you tried to explain the situation to them, believing that they did not understand the reality of what's going on, right? But the response you got was them waving the Israeli flag with impunity in your face, like as a sort of like provocative response. What is the motivation behind this? If it was blackmail, if they were forced to act certain way they didn't believe in, moral wise, then this response is very weird. Like, why would they act this way? If they knew that they were like implicit in a genocide, why would they act with such impunity? Like, you'd expect this from someone who believes that they're in the right, right? And that you're evil, for example. So this reaction is justified in some way. I'll try to just limit it to one more question. You talked about the brainwashing of Israeli from birth, Israelis, and how they were basically raised to dehumanize their Palestinian counterparts in order to be able to commit such atrocities. So what I don't understand is, okay, we can say that the people who are brainwashing were brainwashed in turn when they were children. But when does this start? Where does it start? And what is the motivation for the one who started this to enact this on his own children, on his own population? What's the motivation here? Those are the three main questions.
Okay. I'll go back to the first one. So I think that it's important to understand that the oligarchy that exists on our planet right now is not like, it doesn't really have a state. It doesn't have a country. It's spread throughout Europe. It's spread throughout the Arab League. It's spread throughout my country and Israel. It just so happens that in this time and space that we exist, my country is the United States of America with an unwavering alliance with Israel is the global power. But oligarchy exists historically empires rise and empires fall. It just so happens that the empire now that the oligarchy is controlling is America and Israel. And so to understand that we're infiltrated by the Israelis because of the oligarchy there. But the oligarchy exists here too in my country. I mean, there's oligarchy here. I often wonder, why hasn't Istanbul completely sanctioned Israel? You know, there's a level of infiltration in your country as well. So you can't think of it as a concept of being one country or the other. These rich elite people are scattered throughout our planet, and they work together in order to, move the chess pieces, if you will, in whatever will benefit them the best way.
So when you say benefit them, like, what is this unit of people exactly? Is it like a sort of like wealthy class that
Yes.
just want to perpetuate their own
Yes.
self-interest?
Yes, it's the wealthy.
So
it's literally the billionaires and trillionaires of our world, the 1% that control us, the slaves. That's what it is. So yeah, I think it's so important. I'm glad you asked that question, because it is so important for us to understand that the oligarchy does not just exist inside of Israel or America. I mean, you think about the Rothschilds, you think about the Vanguards. These are all people that are all a part of what we're witnessing right now. So, and then I'll go back to the blackmail question. I don't think that everyone is blackmailed. I think that there are a lot of politicians that are. I have colleagues that have went to lobby behind closed doors with politicians and have told me that there is a real sense of fear in their voices, that something is going on where they have a sense of fear. We look at Thomas Massey, a Republican from Kentucky whose wife died coincidentally a week after he did an interview with Tucker Carlson going against AIPAC. my entire country truly believes that that the Israelis are a part of the death of his wife. And so you have to understand that there's a level of fear here. There's a bounty on my head. I have a bounty. Is it going to prevent me from speaking? No. If they assassinate me, and I say it publicly, if they assassinate me, I ask you to make me a martyr. That's all I ask. Maybe bury me in Palestine. But some people, they don't feel this way because maybe they don't have faith, or maybe they don't have a religion, or maybe they don't have supportive family. So there's a real level of fear. And then there's also blackmail. You look at Republican congressional woman Nancy Mace, who spoke in the wrong direction, if you will, and an entire video went around of her taking shots and kissing other people in a circle. I mean, they have video footage of people that they will release. And so you have to understand that some people, for them, that is more important than speaking out against a genocide because of their own moral compass.
Can I just say something about this? before we
Yes.
go? Sorry. The real point of confusion here was not the person who refuses to speak out because of fear or because of misunderstanding, but the one who acts with impunity on the wrong side, while
Yes.
knowing that they're on the wrong side. What is the motivation? What is the psychology, like in your opinion, behind the person who acts in this way, right? Like your example.
Yeah,
of the
like
person-
Senator John Fetterman. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can speak a little bit to that, to him, from my own psychology. Honestly, he comes from a lower middle class family, working family. That's how he won his position, actually, campaigning on the fact that he was a blue collar middle class. And when you grow up in this way where you're always the underdog, you're always, at the bottom in a sense, from a financial perspective, you have these friends who always have money and they go on vacations and you never get to do that. I think as adults, once we come into a position where we have power and we're put on a platform and a pedestal, and now we have this financial money to do these things we never did before, it becomes very confusing, because this is something that you long for as a child, especially growing up in a capitalist country. You long to be able to achieve these things and have these things. And I think for John Fetterman, that plays a little bit of his psychology of coming from being this poor child in a middle class family to having all this power now. And AIPAC gives him thousands and thousands of dollars to remain in position. So this is also very important. The AIPAC lobby group is spending millions and millions of dollars in my country to control the legislative branch. They will get him out. Look at Jamal Bowman. Look at Cori Bush. Those are both candidates who had full support inside of their own districts, but because of AIPAC's, they spent millions of dollars to slander them, sponsored ads on social media against them within their own districts, and ultimately it worked. So yeah, well, we'll see if they actually release those files. It'll be totally redacted, I'm sure. And then number 3, the trauma, the generational trauma. How do you go from one generation to the next of teaching this level of evil? Well, I'll use my own example. My father was a veteran. He joined in 1962 during the Vietnam time era. And everything that I was taught as a child was to be patriotic, was to serve the country. That if you wore the military uniform, you were considered honorable and elite and put on this pedestal once again. And so when you join the military, coming out of this poverty economic situation, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're someone, right? So, but this generational idea, this generational ideology is passed on from generation to generation. In my lifetime, I have 4 children. They will not join the military until my country changes its foreign policy, because I do believe countries need a military. There will always be a bad actor like Israel, for example, that you need to protect. But protecting and defending your country versus offense and committing atrocities and war crimes are 2 different things. And I think this applies specifically more with the people inside of Israel and the society there. They came from a society where they were genocided themselves. There was a Holocaust against the Jews themselves by the Nazis. And so you can imagine that that generational trauma, it's easier for them to be convinced to do the things that they're doing because of what their grandfather has told them, what their parents have told them, what their great grandparents have told them. It's easy for that. And then also you have to take into consideration the religious perspective. These people truly believe that they are the chosen people on this planet. And my country, the Christians, the evangelical Christians, truly believe that they are the chosen people on this planet and that they can do no wrong. This is something that is imprinted on the core of who they are. You think about your core and then you have layers of brainwashing. In their core, they believe they are chosen people. That they can't do like that, everything that they do for their society and for their people, because they believe this. And the way that they've been able to use this for evangelical Christians inside of America is inside of the Bible. It talks about the Israelites. And what a coincidence they named the country Israel, because they are able to somehow tie Israel, the state of Israel, to the Israelites of the Bible. But historically, now we know the Israelites are not the white Europeans that are coming from all of these other countries. We know that the Israelites are the Palestinians. But this concept is slowly, this truth is making its way around Christians in America, thank God. But to your question about how do they pass this on, I think it's just a generational trauma and ideology that is taught from birth.
Can I add something to that real quick? I think the interesting point here, the thing that I find fascinating, is that these people, when we talk about how they justify their acts with what the acts that were acted upon them, like the Holocaust and all that. So they're already moving from a moral imperative, right?
Yes.
The idea of, oh, we were wrong, right? So there's this morality dynamic twisted, but still morality related dynamic going on in their head. So they're morally driven people from a certain perspective, twisted perspective, sure. But this fact alone makes me question how these people don't see the morality of the current situation as well. In the same way, because you can make a distinction between a self-interested person who identifies the lack of morality in his actions and a person who is more morally driven, like driven by a moral imperative, as I said, even a twisted one. But still, this there is a difference, that there's a distinction that can be made there. And the latter, a morally driven person, should be able to much more easily, or be ready, be prepared to much more easily identify a morally loaded situation like the current one, right? So how can this person who from the onset is a morally driven person in his action, even his twisted genocidal actions, not see the moral dilemma of his own actions, right?
Don't see you as a human being.
Yes, you have to think about this, that there are morals that can stem from darkness or light.
But the
This-
problem with this, can I just,
Yes.
I need to say the problem with this is that as long as this person, like if you go so far as to say that the brainwashing actually makes them fully convinced that these are not human beings, then this is a different issue. It's almost like you absolve them of sin. But when you say that these are still people who are able to think for themselves, even if the brainwashing is so overwhelming, the lack of identification of like the immorality of what they're doing, it's very alarming. In this, of course, it's alarming. I mean more in the sense that these people, as I said, they're morally driven, and sure, there is brainwashing, but there's still room to identify what's wrong with what they're doing, right? Because they're still morally driven, not driven by self-interest. At least something. I'm not saying that. I just want to clarify something. I don't mean morally driven as in they're moral people. Morally driven as in they justify their actions with morality.
Yes.
So there's a very easy way for them to psychologically identify what's wrong with this situation. Like a more self-interested person who identifies that his actions are self-interested, there's a very easy barrier between him and his actions. But a morally driven person, no, this is much more vague in his mind. This is what I believe it is, like, if this makes sense. So to breach this gap, to breach this barrier for a moral person is much easier. It's a vague gap. He himself has to keep it up with a lot of justifications, moral justifications that are clearly very flawed. But a self-interested person, he put the barrier up himself, right? And he understands this barrier. So crossing it is not going to be very easy. Not easy. It's going to be very hard to convince him to cross this barrier. But a morally different person, if he sees the sheer immorality of the situation, like a borderline, it's not actual, it's an actual genocide. So you
Yeah, I
understand what
think
I mean?
I think, I think about this often. I call it brain acrobats. Like how many tricks do you have to do inside of your brain to block it from being able to see, think, and feel that what you're witnessing is wrong? It's almost you start thinking from the psychological perspective. What are you having to shut off or tune to a different direction? Your neurons, the electric neuron pulses, like what is happening where you're not physically feeling inside of your body as a human being that what you are witnessing and what you are doing is wrong. I often wonder this. And I tried having a very long, for months, I tried speaking with an IDF soldier. And we went back and forth in conversation for months. I would send him videos. I would try and speak to his, humanity. I wanted to break down some of the barriers, if you will. And I thought that I had made progress to a point where at least he was speaking negatively about Benjamin Netanyahu. And I thought, okay, we're on the right track. We're making headway. As if he could just say something negative, because he has a large following on social media. And I thought if he could just say one negative thing about Benjamin Netanyahu, this could be a crack that we can, open up. Then he went silent. And about a month later, he was in northern Gaza committing massacres. So I don't know. What's the answer? What's the psychological answer for these human beings, for this society? I really have no idea. I've watched Israeli citizens, an elderly woman who was asked about the children getting slaughtered, and literally her answer was, "Who gives a? They'll grow up to be Arabs. Who gives a?" It's like I honestly don't know. This is probably something that will be studied for years to come, for decades to come.
Unfortunately, they are taught from a very young age that Palestinians are not human beings. I mean, we've seen them throughout the years being called grasshoppers, cockroaches, completely dehumanizing every Palestinian. The way human shields, these don't have empathy, terrorists, all these labels that they have, so that you don't even have to think about it. You look at non-humans. Look at even Western officials. When they talk about this issue, they talk about hostages, captives, few dozens Israelis, how they sympathize, empathize, how they talk about them, and then they look at thousands and thousands and thousands of children and women innocently massacred day in and day out. Nothing. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. I mean, these people, they know how to empathize. They empathize with a hostage. Somebody is probably being taken care of, but they don't with why? Because these people are in their minds are no longer human beings. It's like if you walk by an alley and you find a cockroach or a rat dead, are you going to empathize with that? No. That's exactly how they look at Palestinians, unfortunately. We need to go still for those who have any comments or questions. Anybody from the Zoom? All right, let's go with today's and then come back to the final round.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. I think you asked some really good questions there. But I just want to make a note that I think that there's a lot of people in Israel and also in America who are starting to wake up. And I remember seeing like a lot of the protests within America, a lot of them were young Jewish people. And I think that this change is happening amongst, as much as we're trying to psychoanalyze the perpetrators. I think what's the positive story here is that there's millions more of people who are waking up and starting to see the light and starting to see that what is happening here is wrong. And I think what's opening up is also a lot of other connected issues. So the fact that we live in a time where we grew up knowing about the Holocaust, knowing about genocide, and then we see a genocide unfolding in our generation. And no one's able to do anything about it. Also, I think has to do with, deep problems about, how morality has been instilled in us because, we're not able to act when we're supposed to act. So I just wanted to make that note. I don't have any other specific question. Maybe-
I actually want to take it back to your own personal experience. You have 4 children, and you could see your children also in these Palestinian children that they were massacred indiscriminately, and that really awakened a lot within your own conscience. And you had to actually, you felt that you had to do something, speak out, do something. And now even you're thinking of running for Congress, which is a big step, obviously, because it's motivating you that we need to stop, we need to do something concrete. How would you advise those who are watching you, hearing you, seeing you, how they can get out of this fear? Obviously, a lot of people feel uncomfortable seeing children, regardless of what the background they have, but yet they are not motivated like you were. They are not as, I wouldn't say as courageous, but they're not as forthcoming as you've been. But they don't feel good about that, but they want that extra perhaps encouragement, yes, to do the right thing, to say, what would you tell them? What would you advise them? What steps they need to do to get to that in which they can feel good about they at least they spoke out.
Well, I guess look at me now. I'm sitting here having this conversation with you. I'm fine. I just went to Amman, Jordan, enjoyed a wonderful time with the Palestinians there, and nothing's happening to me. I'm completely fine. I think there is a fear of consequence, a fear of physical harm to us. When we do these types of actions, people fear this, and rightfully so, they do. But it's okay. I'm okay. I got arrested. I was a little bit nervous, not because I was going to be arrested, but because I wanted to be as impactful as possible in what I was going to say when I yelled at the Pete Hegseth hearing. And it just costs $35, and it's like like a ticket, like jaywalking. Yeah, I got a little ticket, like it's like a jaywalking ticket, and I can get up to 5. In America, you can get 5 before you get a misdemeanor. So I have 4 more times that I can do that. So I don't know. I think it's just like getting over the fact that your life's not going to end after you speak out or do something that, crosses the line, if you will, of like what's normal in society, what's breaking the law. Here in Istanbul, I saw that there was a 4-day ban on demonstrations, and I thought hopefully they demonstrate. I hope that the citizens in Istanbul continue to demonstrate despite this ban, because there's a genocide happening. And what can they do when we are all collectively together by the thousands? There's not much that they can actually do to us. They have to accept that we, the people, are rising.
Well, the ban actually has nothing to do with Palestine.
Oh, is it?
No, no.
Oh, I thought it was Palestine.
No, no.
Well,
It's
can they
ban on some political things going on here.
can they demonstrate for Palestine?
Yes.
Oh, good.
You
I'll go to one.
you alluded to the fact that you're Christian and hold Christian values. I'm sure you go to church. How was the reaction from your fellows at the church? Do they have these same moral quandaries? Do they feel this anxiety about what they see on the screens and social media, and still they want to uphold their Christian values, or are they blinded by this Zionist propaganda going on?
Well, there are two factors I'd like to talk about Christianity inside of America. Since the first Trump administration, the first term that he served, there's been sort of this propaganda and narrative about being America first is being Christian. They've basically whitewashed Jesus. I mean, you can go to any store and to purchase like a nativity set or like a picture of Jesus Christ. He is portrayed as he might as well be Irish. His hair is almost blonde and his skin is white and green eyes or blue eyes. This is what they have done inside of America. They have whitewashed Jesus Christ. They have used, just like they've used Judaism inside of Israel, they've used Christianity inside of America. So I've gotten two sort of I guess responses, if you will. The biggest response I've gotten is to pray. I think that we have lost in the past generations of what praying actually is. We're supposed to pray for action, pray to God for what we should do in action. We've lost that second part. So, people from my church will say, well, just pray about it. Okay, I will pray about it, but I'm praying, asking God what to do about it. Jesus calls us to do something, not to just pray. Nothing will happen with just a prayer. We have to do something. And I think that part has been lost inside of Christianity, inside of America. The true teachings of Jesus Christ have been lost through this evangelical movement that has pulled away from the teachings of Jesus and more focused on these like extravagant things. Like when you go to these churches, the music and the lights, you're at a concert, and there's always something good to be said about a community of Christians, don't get me wrong, but they're missing the point of the scripture of what Jesus has called us to do. And so that part for me has been very difficult. However, I have a really amazing relationship with my priest. I'm a Catholic, a Roman Catholic. And I even asked him to come with me actually on my Christian pilgrimage when I tried to go to Israel before they interrogated me. But because it's Lent, he couldn't come. He said, I'm too busy. I can't come. And yeah, I have a great relationship with him. I actually told him that as soon as I get back to America, I want to file a complaint with my diocese. And I was not allowed in. And with the Vatican, I'm going to file a complaint with the Vatican against the government of Israel because I was going to Israel on a Christian pilgrimage last week, and they detained me and interrogated me, denied me my right to visit the holy sites, and banned me for 5 years. So much for democracy and Christian support.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear about the way that your religious background has kind of also informed your position on the genocide. And it's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that. But on the issue of Christianity, one of the things that I find puzzling, and I think a lot of us who observe this find puzzling, is that Christianity, America is a Christian country. I mean, there's a lot of churches, there's a lot of evangelism. I mean, I was in the South, and the South is filled with a lot of Christianity, but the Palestinians, a portion of them are very old and long-standing Christians, but there's a huge, I mean, how does Christian Zionism, what kind of arguments are put forward to justify the killing of their fellow Christians within the Holy Land, who are obviously not Israeli and who are ethnically Palestinian?
If I'm being honest with you, I think the information that exists about the reality that there are Palestinian Christians is still being censored. There is a campaign by Christians to spread awareness of this reality. Even by myself, I do a lot of collaborations and work with Christians in the community. I have a lot of Palestinian Christians friends, as you can imagine, but I don't think that it has been big enough to actually make evangelical Christians aware that Palestinians are not just Muslim. We are so censored by Meta. By even on TikTok, we're starting to see content getting censored. And I just think that people just still aren't actually aware.
That's so strange because
Yeah.
in Iraq it was everybody came to learn that there's Yazidis, which were this like small super minority within Iraq, and Palestinian Christians are a big part of Palestinian identity. They've been there for many, original Christians, and yet that is not known by most of Americans.
We're not taught that. I grew up a very devout Catholic. My mother ensured this. I don't think I actually missed church unless it was like an emergency reason until I was 28 years old. So everything that we're taught is about Israel. We're taught about the state of Israel. We're not told about Palestinian Christians. We're told about the state of Israel. The Jews are the chosen people inside of Israel. We are not even taught that there are Christian Israelis. We are only taught inside of our, Catholicism is what I went to, Catholicism, academics, if you will, that it's just Jews inside of Israel and they are the chosen ones and we must support them at all costs. This is what we're told. But at the same time, thankfully for my religion, which is in a sense very different than evangelical Christians, is that
international as well.
Catholicism. It's very closely related to Islam. Now, I started reading the Quran and I read chapter 18, which is about Mary, 19, about Miriam. And I just was like, wow, I cannot believe that they actually believe the same things as us. And then I learned that Muslims don't even say Jesus without saying peace be upon him. I had this conversation on Ash Wednesday. I missed mass. So I went to my priest's headquarters, his house, to get my ashes. And I told him this. I said, did you know that Muslims don't even say Prophet Jesus without saying peace be upon him? He said, really? I said, yes. I said, they love him. Mary. I said, do you know, I think Muslims actually love and respect Jesus and Jesus's teachings more than Christians in America. I'm coming to realize it is definitely true. But thankfully, my religion, I'm thankful that it's stuck to the Bible and scripture more than what we're witnessing the evangelical Christians. They these pastors will read a scripture and then apply their own interpretation of it. And so that's why we're starting to see this like Americanized Christianity happening.
Right, because they're obsessed with the end of times.
Yes.
And they think that this is what we're living right
Yes,
now. And they
absolutely.
want to force, the coming of Jesus as if this is something up to them,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. I think the battle in America is not just against the Zionist movement in terms of AIPAC and their pro-Israeli stances, but also within this cultural hegemony that we have these evangelical Christians having, in which they are tying basically not only the geostrategic and geopolitical interests of the US, but also what they think is the end of times and the coming of Jesus and the apocalypse and all these notions and the rupture and all that. That's where a real cultural and philosophical battle, I think, is awaiting us. And I think the Catholic Church can play a huge role in this.
Absolutely. We have seen, the Pope has been very vocal since the beginning of this. Thank God. I have been able to use his words to share with other Catholics in my community because, the Pope is our leader. And so I often wonder why there was such a disconnect between the bishops in America and the Pope and the bishops overseas. And I even asked my priestess, I said, have you gotten any emails, any correspondence, anything from the bishop or the Vatican regarding this situation? Because I'm thinking surely they're sending out this information to have the priests preach to the congregation what's going on, the truth of what's going on. And he said, no. I said, why do you think that is? He said, there is such a disconnect between the bishops in America and the bishops overseas. It's truly like almost like two separate organizations that are happening. And so, maybe that's a direction that we as Catholics can take, is like, how do we close that gap? How do we spread what the Pope is saying all the way down to the congregations inside of America? But also, I will tell you that, in the state of Ohio, just in the last 10 years, We've went from roughly 150 priests, down to 42, I think. Or no, in my diocese, sorry, in the diocese, 50 priests in my diocese down to 42.
What happened to them?
The Catholic COVID-19 caused a lot of people to leave the church and not come back because the evangelicals were Christians had the technology and financial means to start doing like streaming mass. And so a lot of people went from Catholicism over to
I mean, these churches closed down?
these churches are closing masses. There's a church right down the road from my home, a Catholic church that since 1838, within this past few months for the first time does not have a mass on Sunday.
Wow.
So there is a level of Christianity that's dying, if you will, inside of America.
We have a few more minutes left. You alluded during your opening about the Islamophobia you were witnessing while an officer, particularly when you were stationed overseas. Do you see that Islamophobia rising or declining in America as you've lived in the past few years as a civilian?
It's definitely declining. I think that there is still I think there are still roadblocks that we have to overcome when it comes to the reality and accepting the reality of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. And I think once we can have more veterans, well, we do have a lot of veterans speaking out, but once they can be platformed more to speak against this, I think it'll help Americans come to the realization that because of Israel, we are sending our American citizens to die. And so, you know, when it comes to Islamophobia, I see it declining. You know, I see that Israel and America, the American government are having to spend millions and millions of dollars on propaganda because they're not winning. They're losing the information war. So yeah, I anticipate that in 2 years, we're going to see them probably spend close to $1 billion to try and get their candidates elected.
Wow. Okay, final 2 questions. What would your advice be to the students on campus now seeing all these crackdowns coming in? What do you tell them?
Get out and protest. It's so important to put pressure. The student government, organizations all have to come together. Don't underestimate what even a letter can do. Because if you write a letter and have every organization on campus sign it stating that you want divestment, you want to boycott, etc., there's a lot of power in that. And there's something else I want to say when it comes to colleges. Don't go to a college that invests billions of dollars. Don't put your tuition there. And this goes for Americans as well. You know, start going to colleges that are against the genocide, that have divested from the genocide. Even parents, don't send your children to these Zionist colleges. That's how we combat this. We rob them of their money. Boycott, divestment. That's how this is going to really cripple them to their knees.
And my final question has to do what your advice would be to people in Turkey, in the Arab world. What would you like them to do, to see, and how can we link bonds with people of the United States? What do they need to know also about people in the United States so they will have the right frame?
Yes. I think it's so important that the organizations inside of Turkey link with organizations inside of America. It's so important that we have this connection because this is how we break the narrative. Just my past week here in Amman, Jordan, I have deprogrammed years of propaganda that my country has taught me about the people in Jordan. These are some of the most beautiful, hospitable people. I mean, I feel like I have family in Jordan now. It's like mind-blowing. It's something that I feel like I can't even describe, honestly. And then also, once you link up with these organizations inside of America and have this working relationship, this collaboration together, have delegations come here. The more Americans that come to the Middle East, that come to Turkey, that come to Amman, the more that can see the truth, the harder it is for our country to try and use this propaganda that the people here are terrorists, the people here want to harm us. I mean, look at us. We're sitting next to each other in Istanbul. Whatever American sees this, we've already destroyed millions of dollars of propaganda. So a Christian and a Muslim, I'm assuming you're Muslim, sitting together, we've already destroyed millions of dollars of propaganda. This is so important. So anyone, any of these organizations, please reach out to college organizations inside of America. Join link together with college organizations in Amman. This is how we combat the propaganda.
Thank you so much, Josephine.
Thank you for
making the
having me.
trip. Thank you for being open with us and giving us your experiences. It's really very enlightening, very fruitful, thought-provoking discussion. We really appreciate it. Thank you always for being part of this. And thank you everybody for being here with us, and on to our next event soon, inshallah. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.